so many familiar faces now and some new friends joining us this evening. My name is Sophie Gilliatt-Ray and I'm the Director of the Islam UK Centre. And this is the 7th year that we've had an annual public lecture series. And it's grown really over the years from being a very sort of small in-house research seminar to now a much more significant occasion where we can really celebrate the partnership that we have with a range of local Muslim organisations, the Muslim Council of Wales, the Islamic Society in the university, and Muslim Youth Wales. But the lecture is also a really good way of building links with other parts of the university. So wherever possible, we've tried to organise topics and speakers where we can build some interdisciplinary connections as well as some interreligious connections as well. And in that regard, I'm really delighted to welcome Professor Susan Baker from the Sustainable Places Research Institute here in the university, who will be chairing tonight's lecture. So I shall hobble away and hand over to Susan to take us forward from here. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to hobble off?
I'll hobble. Okay.
Okay, so welcome to tonight's lecture, which is going to be delivered by Fazlun Khalid. And the lecture is on Muslims, the environment, and the challenge of the emerging order. And we're really very, very delighted to have our guest speaker here tonight, who has a worldwide reputation in his advocacy work on environmental protection, rooted in religious tradition. And he is recognised as a world-leading eco-theologian, so we're very, very honoured to have him with us today. He's also had the honour of being listed as among the top 100 environmentalists in the UK and one of the 500 most influential Muslims in the world. He's also very active on the ground. He has established an NGO on Islamic Foundation for Ecology and Environmental Sciences, and is also active from an intellectual and theoretical perspective. So without any more ado, I'm going to invite our guest speaker to come up here tonight, who will speak for about 30-35 minutes, and then that will open the floor for questions, discussions, issues arising, and I shall chair that with a view to ending sharply at 8 o'clock. So, thank you.
I'm going to hobble up.
And I shall hobble off.
Thank you. Greetings and good evening, friends. Thank you, Sophie, firstly, for giving me the honour of. There's no sound system, is there? Just.
Your voice will be coming through a microphone.
Good. But I'm not asking for one. I'm just. Well, give me the honour of doing the introductory talk in your series. And Susan, thank you for your kind introduction. A lot to compress in a short time. I'm going to talk about, perhaps in broad outline, 3 possible subjects. One is trying to think through where we came from and how we got here to this particular situation, and how changes came about and where Muslims locate themselves today in this wide globalized world, and whether we can solve these issues that confront us today or not. I'm taken back, for starters, just 3 months when there was a great hoo-ha about this Mayan calendar, where they were talking about the world is going to end on the 21st of December. And the world didn't, of course. But someone said quite interestingly, this may not have been about the world ending on a particular day, but it's about, possibly about epochal changes. Changes in the way that the world is run by the humans. And thinking back on this, thinking a little bit about this, going back to the hunter-gatherers, and hunter-gatherers moving into an agricultural scenario, hunter-gatherers survived who knows for how long, 30, 40,000 years. 8,000 years ago, there was an epochal change in which human beings began to settle. But that didn't happen overnight, did it? It didn't happen like on the 21st of December, or whenever. Or epochal changes also take a long time to change. A long period of gestation, if you like. And we don't know who put 4 poles in the ground and put a thing on top, some leaves on top. Oh, I built a house. So we are agricultural communities. You know, we don't know that history. But something did happen more recently in our history, in which things did change, things were said and done, in which the kind of epoch we are living in today happened. And these things perhaps weren't pointed out as this was the time in which this new epoch came, because as I said earlier, these changes also, these massive changes in the way we live, happened through a period of time. One of these changes, I think I'm talking about the Enlightenment, and one of these changes happened when somebody pointed out that we were living in a zone, in an area of existence that we really didn't belong in. And the idea for that was summed up by Richard Thomas, who wrote The Brilliance of the Western Mind, when he said that there was a shift. There was a shift, a radical shift from the psychological alliance from the divine to the human. I put it to you that that was one of the points on which this epoch was built in. There was an epochal change when the humans then took over, if you like, aspect of running the world, the whole idea of the Enlightenment, secularism, and all these things evolved from that period when Descartes said we are lords and possessors of creation. We are masters of creation. When the human took over from the divine. This jars with a Muslim perspective, because for me as a Muslim, we are not lords and possessors of creation, because we say every day, 5 times a day, 15 times a day as we pray, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Praise be to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. So the Muslim position is one of submission, whereas the Enlightenment position, as it emerged, became one of domination, as we see from the economics of today and how we dominate the world. And I think it was from that time onwards, our unconscious acceptance that we belong to the earth, that we are part of nature, that we are something embedded in the natural world, that we lost that. That is no longer in our consciousness. Today, we don't go about thinking where we are. You know, life is full of economics, learning your living, commuting, writing, studying, looking for careers, consuming. That's what life is about. It is not about asking questions like, who are we? Where are we? Where do we belong? Of course, that was then followed on by the Newtonian world of the view of the world, where it was imagined that the Earth was a clockwork machine, and there was it was cranked into existence by someone somewhere. Then after Newton, we had Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. And then we had the Industrial Revolution, then we had the steam engine, then we had all the things that collectively give us the kind of lifestyles where we live today. But there's also something quite important happened in this period, apart from the intellectual advances that were made in the West, and that was the creation of the Bank of England in 1694. And that also made it possible for people to then give expression, what gave the fuel to express the secular worldview, the industrial worldview, was the creation of debt, because this is how the world survives today. I think undergraduates will understand this because they start life being in debt to some bank or other, which they have signed their papers to, signed their names to. Now, one of the things, well, the major thing that happened in this situation was, as I said earlier on, that pushed the human race forward was the Industrial Revolution. And from that point onwards, we began to use the Earth's resources and talk about issues like prosperity, growth, economic expansion, GDP, standards of living, and the whole political system and government was geared to giving all of us high standards of living, and the West particularly achieved this by the time of the 20th century. And these economic activities actually depended on fossil fuels. And one of the things we come across today is the whole argument about climate change, heavy carbon footprint, about excessive energy consumption by developed and developing societies. And it is also the climate scientists have discovered through investigating core samples of ice from the Arctic regions that parts per million of carbon dioxide, was about 280 pre-industrial revolution. Now, what happened before that was that there was the 280 parts per million was a fact for most of the human society. And what happened after the Industrial Revolution is that carbon dioxide concentrations increased in the atmosphere to the extent that it's now nearly 400, which is what is causing great concern. Now, when we look at the predictions made by climate change scientists, when we look at what the Kyoto Protocol and other agencies, that other institutions that try to control carbon emissions try to do, is to try to limit the emissions of carbon and try to, as a result of which, people had to begin to tighten the emissions of carbon in their own countries. Now, this is proving very difficult. And the other thing is, as we function in a globalized world, Muslims cannot expect to be something else apart from all what is happening. And I'm reminded of this when some years ago, as I started this work, when I went to two scholars and I said to them, what is the problem? And they were saying to me, this is not our problem, let them do it, meaning the West created the problem, therefore it absolves us from any responsibility over these issues. But the fact of the matter is, wherever the Muslims are, they are part of a globalized world, and therefore they are also equally responsible for what is happening today. They cannot shift any responsibilities to other people. And something else that also happened is that in the same way that the other traditions have distanced themselves away from their basic teachings of their faiths, Muslims also had lost their understanding of their relation to the earth and through that relation to the Creator. Because if one says that everything on the earth is a sign of the Creator, then we are also part of that sign, those signs. And therefore, I found it very difficult, having started this work, to try to convince the Muslims that there is something that they are missing. That there is a dimension that if they only understood what was going on, they could in fact make a contribution from their understanding to the rest of the world about what it is that they can do in order to alleviate the problems, the common problems that the human race faces. So there needed to be we needed to find a way in which it was possible to reintroduce, that is not a too highfalutin word, to the Muslims the idea that they can, through their own teachings, communicate something that is positive to the rest of the world. In order to do that, again, when I went to the scholars, this is going back nearly 30 years, and I said to them, what is it that you have to tell me? What can you tell me about Islam and the environment? And they said, one said that this is nature worship, we are not interested. So what I had to do was, in fact, quite late in my life, go back to university and do a master's in Islamic theology based on the Quran, the verses on Quran emerging from the root khalaqa, khayla, qaf. Because there are about 250 verses in the Quran which talks about the earth, the sun, the moon, and you say many verses, many chapters in the Quran are named after nature, like Al-Ankabut, the spider, the bee, the cattle, and so on. And it was quite surprising for me to discover that there are nearly 260 verses in the Quran at the very minimum about creation, and about the birds and the bees and the stars and the moon and so on. And it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough that these ideas were there, these verses were there, but I felt, given the urgency of the time, because I was challenged at one of the meetings I had in the mid-90s, I was challenged by a Christian colleague who said to me, Fazlun, what has Islam got to say about these things? I had no answer. But once having discovered that there was an answer, and what I discovered was Islam is intrinsically environmental. You see, and I also asked myself the question, why was it that these teachings have been lost? And if you think about it, you see, environmentalism is, even in the Western academic world, a new discipline. You see, it didn't happen until come on, what's the name? Violet? No, Carson. Rachel Carson. Until Rachel Carson discovered, why was it silent spring? Why was spring so silent? There were no birds. Why were there no birds? Because the soil was dead. Why? There were no worms or bees or flies or whatever that the birds could eat. There was nothing there because of the agricultural activities at that time. So until Rachel Carson appeared and wrote this book, Silent Spring, there were no specifically environmentalism courses in universities as we know it today. This is also an evolving thing. But as far as the Muslims are concerned, I had to ask the question, why was it that there was no, if there are so many verses in the Quran that articulate an environmental language, well, what about the Muslims then? Because it appears the answer was that if they had followed pre-enlightenment, pre-Descartes, all societies were close to nature. And if, as far as the Muslims are concerned, if they had followed the teachings of the Prophet, there would have been no need, and there was no need for any environmental teaching specifically. Because you are the environment and you live with it organically, and if you follow the teachings and the hadith and what is in the Quran, you are environmental. So it was not an issue. It became an issue only after we became separated from the divine. You see, the world became secular. So Muslims are also, don't kid yourself that you're something different. We are also, Muslims are inevitably, intrinsically part of a globalized world that is dominating the earth. There's no excuses about it. So in a sense, we've lost it. So how do we regain it? This is the challenge. So for me, in a very humble way, what I could do was, okay, let's take this on, and let's try to devise a teaching that can communicate, that will reach the pool of knowledge that the ulama already have at one level, and reach other people, young people, activists who have their hearts in this subject, but who also want to then be active in this. It had to be done quickly. And so I've tried a few experiments, and I was talking to Dr. Umar Abdullah Nassif in Jeddah after a Harvard conference in the late 1990s, and I said to him, we need to devise a teaching which we could call Ilm al-Khalq. He sort of warmed to the idea. It's great. He said, you go and do it. Ilm al-Khalq meaning knowledge of creation. And so I'm glad I had his affirmation. And consulting colleagues, speaking to other ulama, we devised a technique where we could break this down into 4 specific principles. First one is Tawheed, which we call the unity principle, where you can discover ayats like Akbar min khalqin nas, that is, creation is bigger than humankind. We can discover ayats like Kana Allah bi kulli shay'in muhita. Allah encompasses. Allah is muhit. The idea of holistic was already there. You see, but we discovered that there are lots of other ayats affirming Tawheed. Then that's the unity principle. Then we go to give us another principle called the fitra, principle of primordiality. The ayat that we use is Fitrat Allah hillati fatra nasi alayh. Allah originated you in His original creation. So creation was there, and we became embedded in that. We emerged and embedded in that creation. The idea of belonging emerged from that. The third principle, which time have I got?
Are you okay?
Was the principle of balance. Everything was created in balance. Allah to the Wahul Mizan. Wasn't the Kisti wala Mizan. That's in Surah Al-Rahman, ayats 6, 7, and 8. So everything was created in balance. And the other one is a son of the principle of responsibility, Khalifa. So once having devised this, I experimented with this in various parts of the world, starting with junior schools in the UK and going up to undergraduates in Penang in Malaysia. And one day I got a telephone call from a colleague in Zanzibar who said, Fazlun, we've got a problem. The problem is the Zanzibari fishermen are dynamiting coral reefs. And we can't stop them. We've tried all the techniques available to us. This colleague was from CAR International USA. They were working with WWF International in Geneva. And they couldn't change it. We understand that you've got a teaching package available. I said, yes, spot on. I'll come and try it. I haven't tried it in a real life situation because I was eager. Excuse me, but I didn't want to become an academic. That's the last thing I wanted to do. I wanted to get out there. I wanted to get out there and change things, you see. And, you know, the Zanzibar, I did this workshop which I devised based on these 4 principles that I just told you about. And, you know, they stopped dynamiting in 24 hours. What the NGOs couldn't do in 2-3 years, we did in 24 hours. Why? Because one fisherman is reported to have said, we can make the law, we can break the laws of the government, but we cannot break Allah's laws. For them it was as simple as that, you see. They are the 4 principles. Now I have taken this course from Toronto in Canada all the way to the Philippines, Manila in the Philippines. But most of my work has been done in Indonesia. And every time I do this course, I teach senior ulama. I don't teach, no, that's too haughty a word to use. I conduct this workshop with these ulama. And I use unusual techniques. Actually, I don't stand here like I'm talking to you, talk to them. I get them engaged. I give them Quranic ayats to discuss based on these 4 principles. And I get them to talk about the knowledge they already know after having sensitized. And you can see their eyes brighten. You see, they have a huge pool of knowledge. All I do is trigger it. And then they're telling me, which is the best part of the work. And so the job is to multiply this work and to do it quickly. And I say to you, there is no time. Going back to reconnect the thread of what I've been saying. So, why is it so urgent? You see, because the news is not good. A moment of self-indulgence. I was invited by the United Nations Environmental Program to do a short article for them in Our Planet, the UN magazine, in 1996. And the point I was making there is that we, as a people, are no different to the people who lived in past civilizations. That is, we have all the positive and negative attributes, but they have all the good things and bad things they did. We did all of that. But one thing, there was one profound difference, because when all civilizations died, the sands covered their traces, or the trees and the forest grew over them, and that was it. It's finished. It's gone. Except what the civilization had to transmit in terms of the artifacts they made, or the learning and the culture was gone. What I'm saying is that all civilizations were biodegradable. They died away, but they were biodegradable. This civilization is the only one that it has gone against the grain. Because if we survive for 4,000 or 5,000 years, and archaeologists were to excavate this civilization that they're leaving behind, they'll have to wear radiation suits. And that is a problem. In order, this was written in 1996. I've just come across a paper. Which was written for the Royal Society, delivered on the 9th of January this year by Stanford University professor and his wife were the senior research assistants. And he says, I've got to read this. Environmental problems have contributed to numerous collapses of civilization in the past. Now, for the first time, a global collapse appears likely. We know the story. Now, these are highly learned people. And one interesting thing I read about that is that Professor Elric and his wife, you know, in academia there is this thing called peer reviews. I have peer-reviewed articles. But this is the first time I've read an acknowledgement that the reviewers who Professor and his wife didn't know were highly commended, because they said in all our academic life these were the two best peer reviews we've ever read. And they were thanked, you see. So this was, in academic terms, a very, very rigorous, good, there's the link there. Please go and see it. So these guys are saying it's the end game. It's all over if you don't wake up. This says, so the Muslims can't stand here and say, come on, it's your problem, it's not ours. We are part of it. You see, if you are not the solution, you become part of the problem. Again, we don't have a choice in this. You see? And then what happens? The next one. Now look, these are two critical international organizations. Whilst you're reading that, I'll tell you, Ralph Lapp, an American sociologist, writing in the 1960s, says that today's civilization is like people riding on a train and nobody knows who's in the front. There's no driver. You see, if you want proof of that, you have the United Nations Environmental Programme saying in Global Environmental Outlook, in July last year, they are saying that, I'll read the bottom line, irreversible changes are likely to occur with significant adverse implications for human well-being. What that means is that, in fact, this is diplomatic speak for saying, look, we've got to change, we can't carry on like this. We cannot have growth. We cannot have economic development. We cannot have the banking system doing mischief in the way that they're doing, because the whole thing has got to change. You see, the whole growth and development paradigm has to be turned upside down. That's the only message you can get from that. But then you have the International Monetary Fund saying exactly the opposite thing. Concerted action is needed, including policies to restore growth. There's a contradiction. You see? Now, how are you going to resolve this contradiction? Because we go as voters. Now, in the last presidential election, the main issue was absolutely nothing to do with world issues or Palestine or the environment even. It's all about who pays the least taxes, who gets the best goodies. You see, if a political party today said, The Kyoto Protocol says that we've got to do this, and in order to do that, we have to reduce our consumption. Then what? No way. The party will have to expand. There's no way that they're going to get their votes if they speak this language. But it's up to us. So you see, the economists and the environmentalists, excuse me, they don't talk to each other. It's about time they did. It's no time to wait to develop eco-economics. Academia has its own pace. People take 3-4 years to write a PhD thesis, but in 3-4 years' time, you might reach the critical threshold of 2 degrees plus centigrade, which all the climate scientists are warning about. You don't have the time. You see? So this is where perhaps the religious communities are coming useful, or they can do something. And I'm speaking as a Muslim involved in this movement, hopefully working with other religious, it's just not just about the Muslims. At least we can change our situation if we want to, but we are not even thinking about it. Because in the Middle East, they're going to set up economic cities in the Middle East. Then they're building skyscrapers in the sand. They have the 2018 World Cup. They have 2 Formula 1 racetracks. What else have they got? They have ski slopes in Dubai. I mean, it's madness. So, what do you want for your children? You want them good education. You want them to come to Cardiff University and get a PhD or a degree. You want them to get a good job. You want them to get 2 cars. You want them to go on holiday every year. All these are fossil fuel associated techniques. David O, professor of education, Oberlin College, Ohio, said a few years ago in an essay here that the greatest polluters today are the MAs, BAs, PhDs, LLBs, accountants, doctors, by simple virtue that they have no spending power. You see? So your aspiration, our aspirations for our children and our grandchildren go against the grain of what it is that we have been doing by pursuing those aspirations in the past. You see? So we are locked in a conundrum. We are locked in this conundrum, and we have to change. And this is why we need to begin to think of, there is a transition movement. We need to begin to think of transition and how we're going to transit from this to the other. Because when you have highly reputable professors from Standard University, this is all, if you go there, it's all over the place. They're saying we cannot do this, we cannot carry on. This is different. So this is the challenge for the Muslims in the West. Yeah, that's our ayat on the Quran. Do not strut arrogantly on the earth. You will never split the earth apart, nor will you ever rival the mountains. Don't do it. About the local, when I was speaking to Sophie about it, she was speaking to me about it, she said, can you say something or include something about Britain? You see, so people are working. There's some material for you. I work with Sophie's department and Mark here on Islamic gardens. That research thing we did, and we acted as consultants for this. Islamic gardens in the UK at one level. At another level, I was meeting colleagues who I used to work with, who are very, very active in the South Wales area, because there were 2 or 3 highly determined young people who wanted to do something, but they got very little support. Very little support from the community leaders, no support from the mosques, no support from people who can really support them. You see, now it's almost sort of withering. I feel sorry for them. It's not the only place. It happens more or less in all parts of the country, where individuals come up push something, and they have to go, they get married or have children or get fall sick or move on, there's nobody to take over. So, but we need an army of people who will jump to the front line and say, we're going to make some changes. It's going to be different. If you don't do that, if you don't have that motivation, having all the qualification in the world is no good for you, nor your children. Because you will also, you know, the Stern report, no, he was supposed to have said in Davos just at the end of January, just 3 weeks ago, that he underestimated his figures, and he was apologizing. He says, I'm not exactly sure of the actual figures. It's going to be more than 2 degrees. Perhaps it's going to be 4 or 5 degrees centigrade. Over it's too late, so people have to wake up. But that went unreported. What Professor Stern said went unreported. Nobody heard about it. And it was of mind-blowing significance to everybody in this room and living in this country, living in somewhere else. It doesn't really matter. But it was unrecognized, unreported. The organization, before I finish, we were setting up, my final remarks, we were setting up little groups all over the country. A colleague in London came up with the idea of LINE, London Islamic Network environment. And then we set up in the Midlands, Midlands Islamic Network. Somebody in Sheffield came up with the idea of the Sheffield Islamic Network. Now colleagues in Wales were thinking about this. My goodness, we can't call ourselves wine, can we? Oh, that's not a good idea. But what about South Wales? It will be swine. But then they came up with this idea. Welcome, this is brilliant. Welsh Environmental Link, creating opportunities for Muslim engagement. Now for that, they deserve all the support that they can get. If you have been listening, thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Fazlun, for an exceptionally wide-ranging and very, very interesting talk. We have about 15 minutes, maybe just a little bit longer left for commentary, discussion, questions. So the floor is open. Okay, Robin, you first then.
Thank you. Very grateful for your talk. It's going to help me with some writing. In order to help me a little more, could you tell me possibly in one word the date of the episode at Zanzibar when you managed to persuade the fishermen to stop dynamiting, and in possibly more than one word, but at least 3 words, could you say a little more about Khalifa?
Zanzibar happened in 2 episodes. One was 1998, we had the pilot workshop. And then the second workshop was 2001. And then subsequently, one of the requests from the fishermen and the community leaders in those workshops was to ask us for a teacher's guidebook on environmental education. And we produced one, English and a Swahili version, perhaps the first guidebook of that nature to learn. Khalifa is all about responsibility. Now, what you do as a human being in order to function as part of the natural world. And to put it quite simply, Khalifa's responsibility, if he or she wants to care for the environment, one has there's no need for someone to have a PhD in the environment. As far as the Muslim is concerned, you just got to look at the Hadith literature and do what the Prophet did. Like a simple example, like don't waste water. One of the companions took water from a river to take ablutions, and what was left he threw on the other side. But don't do that. If there's the water you haven't used, and you don't waste it, throw it back in the river. So it is in a sense. You asked me for 3 words, or a little bit more than that. Khalifa is being responsible and following the example of the Prophet. Then you are Khalifa.
We have yes, you go ahead.
Would you say that the idea of Khalifa is somewhat akin to the Christian term stewardship?
Yes, it equates with that, yeah.
We have another question here, yes?
Thank you very much for your talk. Very pleased to have you here. So thank you for coming down. I wanted to ask about the kind of Islamic response to some of the questions around population and population control. Often from the environmental perspective, a lot of the argument is that population growth needs to be restricted to actually solve some of these problems. And obviously from a Muslim perspective, there would be some hesitancy about the way in which that's worded and kind of notions of kind of sacredness of human life and family planning and so on. So what have you come across in terms of the kind of Islamic response to that?
Well, population is a problem. Population growth is a problem because more people are chasing diminishing resources. So, we have to think actively and practically in this area and say, well, what can we do to reduce population? I think Muslims have a responsibility in this. I don't know what an ulama will say about this. I'm not an ulama, so don't hold me responsible if I just said something. But I would say you have to be responsible. And you have to recognize the fact that population is growing, more people needing diminishing resources, and how you deal with that. So I would encourage Muslims and Islamic states to look at family planning seriously on this issue. That's what I'd say.
Yes?
Just leading on from the last question, would you say it's actually a problem with population and diminishing resources, or is it a problem in adequate allocation of resources?
Interesting point. Good question. It's also allocation of resources. It's also that. You see, I'll tell you why. Because there's a very simple statistic, which is that 80% of the world's resources today is being consumed by 20% of the people living in developed countries. So if you take the reverse of that, which means the rest of the people, 80%, are only consuming 20%. Now, the people who are saying, help the poor world, Millennium Development Goal, all this stuff is coming from the developed world because they want to help their poor brothers and sisters. My heart bleeds. So, what they have to do, if they're really serious about this, you see, is resource allocation. In order for somebody else to loosen their belts, other people that have more will have to tighten theirs. You see, it means then for us, you and me, living in the West, we have to consume less. You see, but people who are with us, you and me, the rest of the population, they don't want to hear that language. What that means is, in the jargon, it's lifestyle change. Will they agree to lifestyle change? I said this earlier. If any politician said you've got to change your lifestyle and therefore your living standards are going to go down tomorrow after the next general election, he won't get elected. You see, but it has to work I don't know. Your point is absolutely correct. Because if there is no, this is something that we can articulate, and it has to be articulated. Because you cannot have this thing about Millennium Development Goals where poverty is going to be eradicated by 2050. I say, rubbish, it's not going to happen because there's not going to be enough resource reallocation in order to achieve that. You see, how they are going to deal with this matter of the Millennium Development Goals is by putting more money on huge infrastructure projects and making the World Bank richer and not having any effect at all on the people that matter. So there are fights on many fronts.
Any other questions? Yes?
Yes, one of the sort of things that came out of the research that we did on sort of British Muslims and environmental action, we found some really nice case studies of things like carbon neutral mosques in the UK where they tried to think about the carbon footprint of the mosque. And it was very clear that the religious leadership in these mosques were kind of setting a very powerful example by their own behaviour. And I just wondered sort of if you might be able to kind of reflect a little bit on where you think kind of British Muslim religious leadership is in relation to these issues, and to what extent you think that Muslim communities would follow if they really took a strong lead?
In the shorthand, Muslim leadership actually only if that marginally involved. There are a few mosques. We are revising our website, which was hacked a few months ago. We are including a page on greening mosques in that, and hopefully to what we are about is advocacy. We don't have the resources to go to a mosque and say, come on, put some solar panels in. But in a sense, that's only the beginning. It's not going to do anything. Yeah, as a matter of fact, they can green mosques, but that's another argument. But to answer your question specifically, there are very few mosques engaged in this. And there are very few mosque committees and ulama who are really interested in this subject. That's the nature of the problem. You see, so our job, the foundation that I run, is education. And education takes the form of not just workshop, but actually, like the Zanzibar project, practically demonstrating that it is possible. You see, and we are engaged in a project now. Hopefully, we go to Tanzania in April, where we are trying to introduce the concept of Islamic natural resources management. It is possible. This is why I get very angry with them, because they have this. There are systems that you can create in the land, called the HEMA system, where you can designate an area of land as a forest, or the tiger reserve, or a reserve for bees during a certain period of the year, or the harem system, where you can have water courses, and where you can protect your river banks, protect water courses. Then there's the ijara system, where there are things for reviving the land. There are so many things that can be done. So we both have the teaching and the practical application. I referred to ilmul khalq, knowledge of creations derived directly from the Quran. But I've been working with some Indonesian ulama, and they're developing a science called fiqh al-biyah. You see, the fiqh, the law of the environment. Biyah meaning in Arabic is ecology. That word, interestingly, is not in the Quran, but it is a commonly used term, fiqh al-biyah. Now, so these new ideas are emerging, you see, but the Indonesian ulama are developing this idea. At the same time, their forests are being denuded. They are cutting down huge areas of forest in Sumatra and Java. Java is almost gone. You see, so there's a battle. There's a battle on. You see, and but the developing countries are voracious for these kind of resources, and forests are being denuded by the demand from the Far East, in China, Japan, Thailand, and even in India. You see, so the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Indonesia following suit, Turkey right behind, developing. Turkey is one of the high growth countries in Europe, by the way. 6-7% is nothing. You see, it's a Muslim country. So what do they know about what they're doing? You see, who can blame the Turkish people? They all want to be like the Europeans and the Americans. Who can blame them for that? You see, but this is why you see, this is why you've got to do it. I think you die trying.
It's really possible that there's the variety of works and so many grassroots initiatives which you've mentioned. I was thinking about the global governance, global environmental governance, for example, we can say. And you also gave an example of how the contradictions are there within the global institutions, and there is always this language of economics, which always works, even for Stern, it works.
Yes.
Only the language.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, how can we, for example, just take the 4 principles which you were mentioning, how can we translate those principles into such a general language which can be understood at the global level or between the institutions?
The only thing that's stopping us in my organization is resources. That's it. That's all that's stopping us. We have the template. We have the template for the teaching, and we have the template for the action. only thing that's stopping us is resources. I don't get paid for my work. I'm not thinking my praise about it, but just, you know, it happens because I'm retired, I have a pension, just enough to put some breakfast on the table for me and my wife sitting there, she will. And that's it, we keep going. But this is a commitment I've taken on. We work with volunteers. 90% of our work, 95% is voluntary. Would you believe that? And we are an internationally recognized NGO. I've been to the United Nations before the Amsterdam debacle, and did a spiel there. So I'm saying that because we are recognized. But the Muslims seem to pretend that we don't exist. See? Because you have to understand. You have to understand that when I begin to speak this language in the Middle East, immediately oil, money, my goodness, you see. But it hasn't dawned on them. It hasn't dawned on them. If they eke out the oil that they have, instead of finishing it in 20 years, they can make it last 200 years or more. Then they will have greater wealth distributed among their own people in a comfortable life, not necessarily a life in towers 2 miles high. It's utter human foolishness. It's that. You see, it's sad. It's sad. We have the answer. If you have a rich uncle, tell me. Yeah.
Sorry, just, you know, as a comment, as a Muslim community here in Britain, you say the resources are what's stopping you. You know, I think among us, if everybody puts their hand in their pocket and give £1 each, that would be something towards, would that be helpful?
Absolutely. You know, like for example, if I'm talking about myself and the work that I'm doing, if over a period of 25, 30 years that we have done so much, and even pioneered a kind of new Islamic journalism with minimum resources, if we had a little bit more, we can, you see, my objective is to work with more volunteers as possible. So in order to summon more volunteers, we need more resources. And if we can get that, a minimum, we can function. It doesn't matter how much comes in, we will make it work. We'll make it work. And that is where we need to go. Where we need to go. People also need to feel a sense of urgency about this. There is no education. Look how many people are here. You're here because you're interested in this subject. And you're concerned about what is going on. And you want to change, I think. And if you want to change, then you have to be involved. One way or another. And you can change.
Have we other questions? Yes?
Have you ever thought of maybe getting groups in different cities who are engaged Muslims, not necessarily just Muslims, to actually go to the local ulama and put pressure on them to study their fiqh and examine how, because what's creating this speed you talk about is actually the acceleration of markets and the speculation that's going on in the markets, in the stock markets and exchanges, and the whole incredible speed with which that is moving, and it's totally haram. There's no, if the fiqh of Islam is studied properly, you can see it is you'd have to get rid of it tomorrow, like they did in Zanzibar on a much smaller scale. But this is the same thing, but huge. But no, and there seems to be no pressure on the ulama to actually get in there and diagnose, like doctors, and have an analysis and see this can't go on. This is haram. Quite apart from the fact that it is destroying the earth. I mean, is there any way we could actually put pressure on our, because people will listen to them. The people in Zanzibar listen to the alim locals who said this is true.
Given the resources that we have, we do what we can in order to engage these people, because we have, in lieu of we are doing both in the sense, as you know, going to cities where there are activists. You know, we've been here, we've been to Swansea and Cardiff, working with the ulama. You see, it's to set up a workshop, they come to the workshop and, alhamdulillah brother, great workshop brother, and they go and say, and we've done the workshops in London, Hounslow Mosque, LSEs, SOAS, getting ulama there. And we're also trying to, having worked at the local level, we also try to work at the national level, introduce it to Muslim Council of Britain, who have councils of mosques and so on and so on. We can work at that level too. Ultimately, it boils down to resources. In a sense, we want to train people, and in order that they can go and train others, train things. That's the only way we can work. We are small, we can't do it. We need to happen in a big way. And training the ulama, or sensitizing the ulama.
Yeah, but I was not talking about from a professional place, but just ordinary Muslims who feel passionately that this is a reality, something has to happen. They are ignorant because the ulama are not teaching them what the true rules of finance and economics are, and that the whole global investment market gambling that goes on, the casino capitalism, as they call it, is what is driving the speed of this production of material goods, which is then creating all this pollution.
Yeah.
You know. And
it should be done.
There should be some, the local, we should go to enforce the ulama to study it. And we don't stop telling us about whether we should divorce and how we're going to divorce, or what sort of triviality that they focus on, which they total to how long your beard is. For goodness sake, we're drowning. What your beard is, which is longer or shorter. Study the real issues.
Yeah.
And if local Muslims can just make themselves a nuisance and just insist in their universities, wherever people are calling themselves ulama or studying things, that's what they should be putting this pressure on to come up with it.
Could be done, should be done. But we need muscle.
There's people.
I'm going to have to stop you there because unfortunately we have come to the end of our session. So what remains for now is for us to put our hands together and to thank our guest speaker.